In a town where Fair Day was always the highlight of the year, what happens when the animals decide to take over the parade? As laughter echoes through Willow Creek, everyone wonders, will chaos or charm win the day? It was the annual Fair Day in the small town of Willow Creek, and everyone knew what that meant. The Great Animal Parade. Each year, farmers and pet owners from across the country brought their finest animals to strut their stuff in a grand procession. This year, however, no one could have predicted the chaos that would ensue. The animals were dressed in their Sunday best, but they had plans that went far beyond simply walking in a straight line. The fairgrounds were a sight to behold. Vibrant banners flapped in the wind, the scent of cotton candy and fried dough wafted through the air, and the excited chatter of children blended with the distant squeals of delighted adults on carnival rides. The grandstands surrounding the parade route were packed with people, eagerly awaiting the spectacle. Little did they know this year's parade would be one for the history books. Not for the elegance or poise of the animals, but for the complete and utter mayhem they would unleash. The parade began with a flourish of music from the town's brass band. First in line was Ferdinand, a towering, majestic Clydesdale horse with a coat of glossy chestnut and a flowing mane that had been braided with ribbons. Ferdinand's handler, old Mr. Thompson, had proudly told everyone that his horse could dance. As the music started, Ferdinand did indeed begin to dance, but not in the way anyone expected. Instead of the graceful, practiced steps Mr. Thompson had taught him, Ferdinand began to prance erratically, his massive hooves pounding the ground with earth-shaking thuds. With each misstep, his handler's face turned a deeper shade of red. The crowd erupted in laughter as Ferdinand spun in circles, kicking up dirt and sending small clouds of dust toward the onlookers. The horse's prancing quickly escalated into a wild jig, his large body swaying back and forth like a drunken sailor. Mr. Thompson, trying to regain control, clung desperately to the reins, but Ferdinand was having none of it. The crowd cheered and clapped along with the horse's unintentional performance, thoroughly entertained by the sight of such a regal animal acting like a giant, clumsy puppy. Next was a pair of goats, dressed in matching vests and bow ties. Their owner, a young girl named Emily, had boasted that they were the most obedient goats in the county. However, as soon as they saw the crowd, the goats had other ideas. With a mischievous glint in their eyes, they lowered their heads and charged straight into the front row of spectators, much to Emily's horror. The goats butted people left and right, sending children and adults alike scattering in all directions. One particularly stubborn goat, a scrappy little thing with a tuft of white hair between its horns, decided it wasn't done causing trouble. It spotted a man holding a large bucket of popcorn and made a beeline for it. The man, not wanting to lose his snack, tried to sidestep the goat, but the determined creature followed him like a heat-seeking missile. The crowd roared with laughter as the man, a portly fellow in overalls, was chased in circles by the popcorn-crazed goat, eventually tripping over his feet and tumbling to the ground. The goat triumphantly buried its face in the popcorn, munching away with an air of victory, while the man lay sprawled on the ground, dazed but chuckling. As the parade continued, the next animal in line was Bessie, a stout and stubborn mule known around town for her unpredictable nature. Bessie, dressed in a sparkling pink tutu, with a sparkling tiara perched precariously between her long ears. Her owner, Mrs. Jenkins, a brave old woman with a twinkle in her eye, had insisted that Bessie was perfectly behaved, so long as she got her way. As soon as Bessie set hoof on the parade route, she froze. Mrs. Jenkins tugged at the reins, coaxed, and even tried bribing her with a carrot, but Bessie was having none of it. Instead, she planted her feet firmly on the ground and refused to budge. The crowd chuckled, knowing what was coming. With a dramatic sigh, Mrs. Jenkins pulled a peppermint from her pocket, a special treat Bessie couldn't resist. But Bessie, in her usual contrarian manner, snatched the peppermint and immediately sat down, her rump hitting the ground with a thud. Mrs. Jenkins tried everything to get Bessie to stand, from sweet talking to gentle pushes, but the mule just sat there, munching contentedly, completely unfazed by the growing laughter of the crowd. Eventually, Mrs. Jenkins threw up her hands in mock defeat, turning to the audience with a shrug that said, "What can you do?" The crowd howled with delight, clapping and cheering for the stubborn mule who refused to participate in the parade. But the biggest troublemaker of all was yet to come. As the parade reached its midpoint, a rather large and rotund cow named Petunia waddled onto the scene. Petunia was a sight to behold. Her brown skin glistened under the sun, and she wore a frilly blue dress that was just a tad too tight, making her look like a stuffed sausage ready to burst. Her owner, a lanky teenager named Billy, tried his best to guide her down the parade route, but Petunia had other ideas. First, she decided that the parade route was far too boring. Spotting a group of children with balloons, Petunia let out a gleeful moo and charged toward them, her sturdy legs moving faster than anyone thought possible. The children, seeing a massive cow barreling toward them, screamed and scattered, but Petunia was quick. She snatched a bright red balloon in her mouth and trotted around with it, much to the delight of the crowd. But Petunia wasn't done yet. As she trotted along, she spotted something even more intriguing: a lady with a particularly large and elaborate wig. The wig was a towering confection of curls and ribbons, and to Petunia it looked just like a pile of delicious treats. With a mischievous moo, Petunia made a beeline for the lady. The woman, engrossed in the parade, didn't notice the cow until it was too late. Petunia jumped up, her snout aiming directly for the wig. With a quick snap, she grabbed a mouthful of curls and yanked, pulling the entire wig off the woman's head. The crowd erupted in laughter as the woman, now wigless and with a look of utter shock on her face, tried to wrestle the wig back from the determined cow. Petunia, however, had a strong grip and wasn't about to let go of her prize. The tug-of-war between woman and cow had the audience in stitches, with people laughing so hard they were wiping tears from their eyes. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the wig came free, but not before Petunia had managed to chew off a few curls. The woman, red-faced but laughing, snatched her wig back and plopped it on her head, now lopsided and missing chunks of hair. Petunia, looking quite pleased with herself, trotted back to Billy, who could do nothing but shake his head in disbelief. The next act in the parade was a pair of exotic birds, a peacock named Percy and a cockatoo named Coco, who were famous for their synchronized dancing. Their owner, a flamboyant man named Ricardo, had dressed them in matching gold vests and tiny top hats. The crude ooh-head and ah-head as the birds strutted into the parade, their colorful feeders gleaming in the sunlight. Ricardo started the music, and Percy and Coco began to dance. At first, it was mesmerizing. The peacock fanned out his vibrant tail feathers and began to sway from side to side, while the cockatoo bobbed up and down, flapping his wings in time to the beat. The crowd was entranced, until Coco decided to add his own flair to the routine. With a sudden squawk, Coco flew off Ricardo's shoulder and began to swoop low over the heads of the audience, his sharp beak pecking at anything that caught his eye. Hats went flying, and the crowd erupted in laughter as people ducked and dodged the mischievous bird. Coco, enjoying the chaos, circled back and landed on the head of an unsuspecting man who had been too slow to react. The man yelped in surprise as the cockatoo began to tug at his hair, fluffing it up into a wild mess. The crowd was in hysterics, and even Ricardo couldn't help but laugh as he tried to coax Coco back to him. Meanwhile, Percy the peacock, not to be outdone, strutted into the middle of the parade route and let out a loud, high-pitched call that echoed across the fairgrounds. Then, in a move no one saw coming, Percy leapt onto a nearby food stand, sending pies and pastries flying in all directions. With a triumphant screech, Percy flapped his wings and sent a cloud of feathers and pie crust into the air, covering the nearby crowd in a sticky, sugary mess. The sight of the usually dignified bird causing such a commotion had the audience in stitches, and many of them were too busy laughing to care that they were now covered in dessert. As the parade neared its end, the final act was a group of dogs, all shapes and sizes, led by the local dog trainer, Miss Penny. The dogs were dressed in colourful costumes, each more elaborate than the last. There was a Great Dane in a superhero cape, a tiny Chihuahua in a ballerina tutu, a bulldog in a pirate outfit, and a poodle with a glittering tiara. The crowd cheered as the dogs pranced down the parade route, their tails wagging enthusiastically. Miss Penny had trained them well, and they performed a series of tricks that delighted the audience, jumping through hoops, balancing on their hind legs, and even playing dead. But as the parade drew to a close, the dogs decided to have a little fun of their own. It started with the bulldog, who spotted a stick lying on the ground and immediately forgot all about the parade. With a determined grunt, he broke from the line and grabbed the stick, shaking it vigorously. The other dogs, seeing the fun he was having, quickly followed suit. The parade dissolved into a chaotic game of chase as the dogs ran around, barking and playing tug-of-war with the stick. Miss Penny tried in vain to confine them, but the dogs were too caught up in their game to listen. The Great Dane, deciding that the stick wasn't enough, grabbed one of the parade banners in his mouth and started to run, dragging it behind him like a giant flag. The Chihuahua, not wanting to be left out, leapt onto the Great Dane's back and rode him like a jockey, yipping with excitement. The crowd was in hysterics. Many doubled over with laughter as they watched the dogs turn the parade into their playground. But the grand finale came when the poodle, in her glittering tiara, decided to take centre stage. Spotting a large fountain in the middle of the fairgrounds, she dashed toward it, her tiara bouncing with each step. With a graceful leap, she jumped into the fountain, sending a spray of water in all directions. The other dogs, seeing the fun she was having, quickly followed suit, and soon the fountain was filled with splashing, barking dogs, all soaking wet, but having the time of their lives. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, thoroughly entertained by the impromptu water show. Miss Penny, soaked to the bone but laughing along with everyone else, finally managed to round up the dogs and lead them out of the fountain. The parade ended with a standing ovation, the audience still chuckling and wiping tears of laughter from their eyes. As the parade ended, the people of Willow Creek gathered in small groups, sharing stories and laughing about the day's events. The animals, now back in their pens and stalls, were the talk of the town. Ferdinand the dancing horse, Bessie the stubborn mule, Petunia the wig-snatching cow, Percy and Coco the trouble-making birds, and the gang of dogs who turned a parade into a playdate. Each one had made their mark on Fair Day. The lady whose wig had been snatched by Petunia was now the proud owner of a slightly chewed but memorable keepsake, which she wore with a grin as she recounted the story to anyone who would listen. The man chased by the goat with the popcorn bucket now wore a T-shirt that read, "Goat Target," a gift from his friends who couldn't stop teasing him. Even the normally dignified Mrs. Jenkins found herself laughing along with everyone else as she told the story of Bessie's refusal to budge, proudly declaring that her mule had won the award for most stubborn animal at the fair. As the sun set and the fairgrounds began to empty, the townsfolk of Willow Creek knew that this year's Fair Day would go down in history as the funniest, most unpredictable parade they had ever seen. And as they headed home, still chuckling at the day's antics, they couldn't wait to see what the animals would get to next year. Ultimately, it wasn't the carefully rehearsed tricks or the fancy costumes that made the parade so memorable. It was the sheer, unplanned chaos and the laughter that brought the entire town together. And that, after all, was what Fair Day was all about.